The woman left to the wolves. The shovel bit into the frozen earth with a sound like breaking bone. Elias Ashford drove it down again and again, each strike sending up a small cloud of ice crystals that hung in the gray light before falling back into the widening hole. The hole was not deep. It did not need to be deep. Snow would cover it within the hour, and by morning the wolves would come, and by spring there would be nothing left to find. The hole was for his daughter. His daughter was still breathing. Nora Ashford lay on her back in the snow 6 feet away, wrapped in her mother's wool coat, her lips the color of river ice. She watched the shovel rise and fall. She watched her father's shoulders move under his heavy coat. She understood what she was watching. She had understood for perhaps 4 minutes now, since the moment her father had set down the coffee pot from the morning fire and had picked up the shovel instead, and had walked past her without looking at her and had begun to dig. 40 minutes before that, Nora had been alive in a different way. The wagon had been moving up the pass since dawn. The pass was a narrow throat of stone and pine that climbed between two mountain shoulders, and the trail cut across the slope at a grade that had made the horses sweat through their blankets. Her father drove the lead wagon. Her mother Harriet sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap. Her eldest brother Jacob drove the second wagon, with his wife Ruth inside and their 10-year-old daughter Lily perched on the seat beside him, and the new baby, not yet named, wrapped in 3 blankets in Ruth's arms. Her youngest brother Thomas, 14 years old and all elbows, sat on the tailgate of the lead wagon with his legs swinging, watching the trail fall away behind them. Nora walked alongside. She was 18 years old, and the walking was easier than the sitting on days when the wind came from the north, because the walking kept the blood moving. She had her hand on the side rail of the wagon for balance. The rail was cold through her mittens. The snow came down in small, hard flakes that did not stick. The hidden rock was on the high side of the trail, buried under the drift. The wagon's left front wheel struck it at a bad angle, and the wheel did not break, only skipped sideways, and the wagon lurched, and the load shifted, and the lurch threw Nora off balance. She stumbled. Her hand came free of the rail. She went down on her knee in the snow. The second wheel struck the rock 4 seconds later. The second wheel broke. It did not break cleanly. It broke in the way wooden wheels break when they are old and have been overloaded for 900 miles of bad trail. It splintered at the hub, and the axle came down, and the whole corner of the wagon dropped, and 2,300 pounds of wood and iron and canvas and stores came down with it. Nora did not remember the pain of the first moment. Her mind had spared her that much. She remembered the sound. She remembered her father's voice, very close, very loud, saying her name. She remembered that she could not breathe, and that she believed at first the not breathing was the wagon on her chest, but the wagon was not on her chest. The wagon was on her legs, from the knees down, and the not breathing was only shock. And when the breathing came back, it came back with the pain, and the pain was not like any pain she had known existed in the world before. They got the wagon off her. Her father and Jacob and the 3 hired men, with long poles cut quickly from pine saplings, levered the frame up enough that Thomas, skinny Thomas, could drag her free. Thomas was crying the whole time he did this. Thomas had ice crystals in his eyelashes from his own tears. He pulled her out by her wrists, and her legs trailed behind her in the snow, and she saw, very briefly, before her mother covered her with the wool coat, what remained of her legs below the knees. And she looked away and was quiet, and her mother held her, and her mother made a small, high sound that was not words. Her father walked the length of the wagon and back, twice. "The axle is cracked," he said. "Not broken, cracked, and the left front wheel is gone. We have no spare. We used the spare at Chimney Rock." "Elias," her mother said. "I am thinking, Harriet." He walked the length of the wagon again. He stood at the head of the horses and looked up the pass and down the pass, and then he looked up at the sky, where the gray had gone a shade darker in the last hour, and where the snowflakes had grown larger, and where the wind had begun to pull at the canvas covers with fingers that meant something. "A day and a half," her father said at last, "to cut timber, to forge a splice, to build out a new wheel. Perhaps 2 days. In this weather, perhaps 3. Elias." "Harriet, I am thinking." He turned. He looked at his daughter in the snow. He looked at his daughter a long time, and Nora saw his face change, and she understood, without being told, what the change in his face meant. She had seen that face before, On her father, at Fort Laramie, when Mrs. Henderson's baby had been born blue and silent, and Mr. Henderson had wanted to turn back east. She had seen it in Nebraska when their plow horse had broken its leg crossing a creek, and her father had walked behind a stand of cottonwoods with the hired man and a pistol, and had come back alone. She had seen it in Iowa when old Brennan, the teamster, had taken sick and asked in a whisper to be left with a loaded rifle and a bottle. Her father did arithmetic. That was what her father did. Her father was doing arithmetic now. "Papa," she said, "hush, girl. Let me think." Her father walked to the back of his wagon. He untied the canvas. He took out the shovel. That was how they had come to be here. That was how her father had come to be standing 6 feet away from her, digging a hole in the frozen earth that was not deep enough to be a grave and was not meant to be one. The hole was a gesture. The hole was a thing her father could do with his hands while he was preparing himself to do the other thing. Nora understood this. She had always understood her father better than her father knew. The hired men would not meet her eyes. 2 of them stood by the horses. The third had gone back to the second wagon and was pretending to check the traces. Jacob stood beside his own wagon with Lily's small hand in his, and Jacob was not looking either. Ruth had climbed down out of the wagon with the baby in her arms, and Ruth was looking, but Ruth's face had gone entirely still, the way a face goes still when the person inside it has shut a door. Only Thomas was looking at her. Thomas's mouth was open. Thomas was beginning to understand. Her father set down the shovel. He walked the 6 feet to where she lay. He knelt beside her in the snow. His beard was flecked with ice. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had finished his arithmetic and had come to the part where he would stop thinking and would begin acting. "Nora," he said. His voice was gentle. That was the worst thing. His voice was gentle. "Nora, listen to me. We are 3 days from the pass if the weather holds, and the weather will not hold. If we stop to mend the wagon, we lose 2 days, perhaps 3. At these temperatures, with the supplies we have, 3 days of stopping means your mother freezes. It means Thomas freezes. It means Ruth and the baby and Lily freeze. Do you understand me? Papa, do you understand me, Nora? Papa, I can ride. Tie me to the saddle. I will not cry out. Your legs are crushed, child. The bones have gone through the skin. You will bleed through any bandage we can make by nightfall. You will be dead before the pass, and the stopping will have gained us nothing. Then leave me the rifle. And have you suffer for 2 days in the cold with a rifle across your lap? No. No, Nora. I love you too well for that." He reached inside his coat. She saw the shape of the revolver before she saw the revolver itself, and something in her chest came loose and began to fall, and she understood in that moment that her father was not a monster, and that this was not a cruelty in the way cruelty usually looked. Her father loved her. Her father had decided, with the same careful arithmetic he used for buying grain and for trading oxen and for choosing when to ford a river, that loving her was not enough. Her father had decided that love and arithmetic were 2 different things, and that arithmetic, in this country, in this weather, at this hour, was the one that kept the family alive. "Close your eyes, Nora," he said. "It will be quick. You will not feel it. I promise you that." She did not close her eyes. She looked at him. She wanted him to see her while he did it. She wanted that much at least to cost him something. She wanted it to cost him for the rest of his life, whatever was left of it, however short it turned out to be. Her father cocked the hammer of the revolver. The click was very loud. "I will stay." The voice came from behind her father, low and even and entirely without drama. And her father turned with the gun still in his hand and saw the hired man standing there in the snow. Caleb Wu was 25 years old, slight of build, a man who had signed on in independence because the foreman needed a man who could handle horses and who would not ask questions. He had asked no questions for 600 miles. He had worked and he had been paid, and he had spoken perhaps 100 words in all that time, and most of those had been to the horses. Now he stood with his hat pulled low and his hands open at his sides, and he said it again. "I will stay with her." "You will die," Elias said. "Perhaps. There is a cabin 3 miles northeast over the ridge. A trapper lives there. I traded with him 2 winters back, on the way east. If I can reach him with her, she lives. If I cannot, we die together in the snow. and that is nothing to you in either case. She is not your blood." Caleb Wu looked at the girl in the snow. His face did not change, but something in the set of his shoulders shifted, as though a great weight he had been carrying had been adjusted to a more comfortable position. "No," he said, "she is not my blood." Elias studied him for a long moment. Then he uncocked the revolver and slid it back inside his coat, and he walked to the lead wagon and took down a canvas bundle and 3 tins of peaches and a small sack of flour, and he carried them back and set them in the snow beside his daughter. "Understand me clearly, Mr. Wu," Elias said. "I will not come back for her. If you reach the valley, you will find me there. If you do not reach the valley, you will not find me anywhere. This is the bargain. I will not send a search party. I will not tell anyone at any trading post that there is a woman left on this mountain. To me and to her mother and to her brothers, from this hour forward, she is dead of her injuries. Do you accept this bargain?" "I accept it." "Say it to her. Say it so she hears it." Caleb looked at the girl. "She hears it," he said quietly. "She has heard everything." Elias nodded once, as though a transaction had been completed. He turned and walked to his wife. He took her arm. He helped her into the wagon, and Harriet allowed herself to be lifted, because Harriet had given up her say in this family a long time before. In a way Nora had understood since she was 9 years old, and had stopped expecting her mother to intervene in anything that mattered. Jacob did not look. Ruth did not look. Lily looked. Small, 10-year-old Lily, and Lily's mouth trembled, and Lily raised one mittened hand in a wave that was also a goodbye, and Jacob caught Lily's hand and pulled it down and pushed the child up into the second wagon and closed the canvas behind her. Only Thomas looked. Thomas tried to climb down. Thomas tried to run to her across the snow, and Jacob intercepted him, caught him by the collar, and threw him bodily into the back of the second wagon as though Thomas weighed nothing at all, which he very nearly did. "Thomas!" Nora called. Her voice was the voice of a stranger. "Thomas! It is all right. Thomas, look at me. It is all right." She did not know why she said it. It was not all right. It was not going to be all right. But Thomas was 14, and Thomas was the only one of them who was looking, and Thomas was the only one whose face she could still save. The wagons began to move. The sound of the wheels faded into the sound of the wind. Within 3 minutes, there was nothing to see but snow. Caleb Wu knelt beside her. He did not touch her face. He did not offer any of the small empty comforts she had half expected. He said, "Can you put your arms around my neck?" "I do not know." "Try." She tried. Her arms would not obey her at first, and then they did. He lifted her. The pain that came up from her legs was a white thing, a sound more than a feeling, and she bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, because she had promised her father she would not cry out, and she was going to keep that promise if she kept nothing else, for the rest of whatever life she had left. 3 miles, Caleb said. Over the ridge, then down. Stay awake. Talk to me. About what? Anything. What did you want? When you got to Oregon, what did you want? She thought about it while he carried her into the wind. Her arms were stiffening. The cold was already inside her coat. Somewhere behind them, her father was driving his wagon toward a pass he would not reach, and he was telling himself, she knew he was telling himself, that what he had done was the only thing a man could do. I wanted to read, she whispered. I wanted to read books, real books, not just the Bible. My aunt in Ohio had a shelf of novels. I used to go there when I could. Good, Caleb said. That is a good thing to want. Will I read books? Yes. You do not know that. No, I do not know that. But I have decided it, and I am a stubborn man, and stubbornness is more useful than knowledge in country like this. Stay awake, Nora Ashford. We have a long way yet. The storm closed over them like a door. The cabin appeared the way things appear in dreams, without warning, without approach, as though it had been waiting behind a veil for them to step through. It was small and low and half sunk into the side of the mountain, and smoke rose from its chimney in a thin gray line that bent sideways in the wind. A man stood on the porch with a rifle held across his chest. He was tall and lean, and perhaps 50 years old, and his beard had gone gray at the corners of his mouth, and his eyes in the failing light had the yellow cast of a wolf's eyes in winter. Turn around, the man said. I do not take in strays. Caleb did not turn around. He walked forward with the girl in his arms, and he said, She is dying. "You may shoot me. I will still carry her to your door." The man on the porch did not move. His rifle did not move. The wind moved and snow whipped across the small clearing, and somewhere in the trees a branch cracked under its burden. The man looked at the girl's face. The girl was no longer conscious. Her head had fallen against Caleb's shoulder, and her lips were parted, and her breath was almost nothing. Something passed across the man's face, something old, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long while. "Bring her inside," he said, "quick, and close the door behind you. You are letting out the heat." His name was Silas Thorne. He did not give it. Caleb read it later, scratched into the underside of a tin cup on the shelf above the fireplace. The cabin had one room, a bed in the corner, narrow, made up with furs, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and above the fireplace a rough pine mantel, and on the mantel a small wooden doll with its painted face worn almost to nothing, and a tin cup and a framed photograph laid carefully face down. Silas Thorne did not speak while he worked. He stripped Nora's coat and her dress to the waist, and he did not look at her body the way a man looks at a woman's body. He looked at it the way a surveyor looks at a map, and his hands moved with a precision that Caleb had only ever seen in 2 places before: in a butcher shop in San Francisco and in the field hospital where his uncle had died of a putrefied arm. Silas Thorne was neither a butcher nor an undertaker. Caleb understood this very quickly. "You are a doctor," Caleb said. "I was." "What happened?" "A great many things. Hand me that bottle." "The brown one?" "No, the other." The work took 4 hours. By the end of it, Silas Thorne's shirt was dark with blood to the elbows, and the girl's legs had been set in rough splints of pine and rolled leather, and her breathing was the breathing of a person who had been pulled back from a great distance and was not yet certain she wished to return. Silas Thorne sat down in one of the 2 chairs, and he looked at his hands for a long time. Then he stood and he went to the shelf above the fireplace, and he took down a whiskey bottle, and he drank from it, and he did not offer any to Caleb. "She will live," Silas said. "Probably. The fever will come tomorrow or the next day. If she survives the fever, she will keep her legs. She will not walk straight. She will not walk far. But she will walk." "Thank you." "Do not thank me. I did not do it for you." "For her, then?" Silas Thorne drank from the bottle again. He looked at the photograph on the mantel, the one laid carefully face down, and he did not pick it up, and he did not turn it over. "Not for her either," he said. He would not say for whom. Caleb slept that night on the floor by the fire, wrapped in a bear skin that smelled of smoke and old tobacco. And in his dreams he was 12 years old again, and his father was leading his sister, Mei Lin, out of the house by the wrist. And Mei Lin was crying, and Mei Lin was saying his name, and he was standing in the doorway, and he was not moving. He woke in the dark with his face wet. Silas Thorne sat in the chair by the window with the rifle across his knees. He did not sleep. Caleb watched him through half-closed eyes for a long time, and understood that Silas Thorne did not sleep as other men slept, and had not slept that way for many years, and perhaps would never sleep that way again. In the bed in the corner, Nora Ashford began to shiver. At some point, deep in the blackest part of the night, Silas Thorne rose from his chair. Caleb watched him through his lashes. Silas crossed the room with great care, the way a man crosses a room when he does not wish to wake the sleeping, and he stood over the bed where Nora lay, and he placed his palm against her forehead, and he held it there a long time. Then he took his hand away. He went to the shelf above the fireplace. He took down the bottle. He sat in the chair by the fire, not the chair by the window, and he uncorked the bottle, and he did not drink from it. He set it on the floor between his boots. He stared into the coals. "Emma," he said. The word was not a whisper and was not a speech. It was only a name said aloud in a room where no one was awake to hear it. "Emma, Emma." Then he was quiet again. He did not touch the bottle for the rest of the night. When the first gray came up in the window, he rose and he put the bottle back on the shelf without having opened it, and he set water to boil on the fire, and he did not look at Caleb, though he knew perfectly well that Caleb had been awake. The fever came the way Silas had said it would come. It came on the second morning, and it rode her for 6 days. Her skin went the color of tallow, and then the color of brick. She spoke to people who were not in the room. She spoke to her father most often. She argued with him. She begged him. Once, near the end of the fourth day, she laughed, a small, dry laugh, and she said quite clearly, "No, Papa, you keep the peaches. I have plenty." Then she turned her face to the wall and did not speak again for almost a day. Silas Thorne and Caleb Wu took turns. One slept while the other watched. The one who watched held cold cloths to her forehead and spooned water between her lips and changed the dressings on her legs and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the fever would hear. On the fifth night, when she was burning so hot that Silas feared her heart would stop, he packed her in snow from the roof, great heaps of it, until Caleb thought she would freeze to death in place of burning, and the fever broke an hour before dawn. She slept. She slept for almost 2 days. On the evening of the sixth day while she slept, Silas Thorne went to a locked chest beneath the bed and drew out a leather-bound book. He carried it to the table. He sat down at the table. He opened the book to a blank page, and he dipped a pen in an old bottle of ink he had to warm by the fire before it would flow, and he wrote a name and a date and a brief line. Caleb watched him from the chair by the fire. He did not speak. When Silas had finished, he closed the book, and he sat with his hand on its cover. Then he pushed the book across the table toward Caleb. "Read it," Silas said. Caleb picked up the book. He opened it. The book was not a diary, it was a ledger. The pages were filled with names and dates and brief lines in an old spidery hand at the beginning that grew steadier toward the middle, and then, in the last 20 pages, had not changed in any way Caleb could detect, as though the hand itself had stopped growing older. There were hundreds of names. "Who are they?" Caleb said. "The ones I did not save." Caleb turned the pages slowly. Corporal J. Hollis, Gettysburg, July 3, 1863. Private W. Anders, Gettysburg, July 3, 1863. Sergeant R. Briggs, Chancellorsville, May 2, 1863. A woman's name, a child's name, another child. A line that read only unknown, Antietam, September 17, 1862. Shrapnel, morphine, 12 hours. Near the end of the ledger, Caleb found a single page with only 3 names on it. The first was Eleanor Thorne, typhoid, spring 1864. The second was Emma Thorne, typhoid, spring 1864. The third was the name Silas had just written, Nora Ashford, pinned under a wagon, January 1876. Beside Nora's name, Silas had written a line Caleb had to hold closer to the lamp to read. Did not die. Caleb closed the book. He held it in his lap a moment. "You keep their names," he said. "You keep them all." "I do." "Why?" Silas Thorne was a long time answering. When he answered, he did not look at Caleb. He looked at the coals in the fireplace, and his voice was quieter than it had been. "Because someone has to," he said. "Because if I do not write them down, there is no one else who remembers every one of them. The armies did not keep good records. The families remembered their own. But no one remembered all of them together. And they were together, Mr. Wu. That is the thing no one seems to understand about a war. They were together at the end. They died in the same tents. They shared the same water. They called for their mothers in the same languages and sometimes in different ones. And if no one writes them down together, they are not together anywhere. And that is a failure I am not willing to make a party to." He was quiet. "Also," he said after a while, "also there is Emma, your daughter." "My daughter. I was not in the room when she died. I was in Baltimore. I keep the book so that I will always be in the room, at least on the paper. It is not much. It is what I have." Caleb nodded slowly. He set the book on the table. Silas took it, and he returned it to the locked chest beneath the bed, and he locked the chest, and that was all either of them said on the matter that night. But he had shown Caleb the book, and this was a thing Silas Thorne had not done for any other man in 10 years. And Caleb understood what it meant, and he did not speak of it afterward, and neither did Silas, because both of them understood that some things are given and do not need to be named. On the evening of the 8th day, when Nora was able to sit up and take broth from a cup, Caleb sat by the fire, and he told Silas about his sister. He had not meant to. He had meant only to thank Silas again, clumsily, for the 10th time, and Silas had waved him off again, as he always did. And then the silence had grown long, and the silence had grown too long. and Caleb found himself speaking into it before he had decided to. He told Silas about the house in Guangdong. He told him about the drought. He told him about his father, who had been a good man once, a man who had carried Caleb on his shoulders when Caleb was small and who had sung him to sleep with the old songs, and who had become, over 2 terrible years, a man who sat at the table with his head in his hands and who drank rice wine at noon and who said that a son was an asset and a daughter was a debt. He told Silas about the merchant who came in the autumn of the bad year, a man with soft hands and a new coat. He told Silas about the morning his father led Maylene out of the house by the wrist. Maylene was 12 years old. She had a doll made of corn husks that she carried everywhere. She was carrying it when she left. She had looked back at Caleb from the yard, and Caleb had been standing in the doorway, and Caleb had not moved. I went to America 2 years later, Caleb said. I told myself I would find her. I worked in my uncle's shop in San Francisco, and I saved and I looked. 5 years. I walked every street in that city where the merchants lived. I could not find her. The merchant who bought her had gone east. No one knew where. No one cared. She was a Chinese girl. She was 12. She could have been anywhere. She could have been nowhere. Silas Thorne had not spoken during any of this. He was not looking at Caleb. He was looking at the photograph on the mantel, the one laid face down, and his hand had risen and had settled on the frame as though to steady it. When I saw Nora under that wagon, Caleb said, I saw my sister. I know it is not the same. I know. But I saw her. Silas Thorne was quiet for a long time. Then he turned the photograph over. It was a small photograph, made in a studio before the war. A woman sat in a high-backed chair. She was not smiling, because one did not smile for photographs then, but there was something around her eyes that suggested she was suppressing a smile, that she was indulging the photographer's gravity as one indulges a child. On her lap sat a girl of perhaps 9 years old. The girl had not managed the suppression. The girl was grinning outright, a gap-toothed grin, her hair slightly askew under a dark ribbon. Her small hand was gripping the woman's thumb. Eleanor, Silas said, and Emma, my wife, my daughter. What happened to them? Typhoid, the spring of '64. I was not there. Why were you not there? Silas Thorne set the photograph back on the mantel, face up this time. That, he said, is a longer story than I have drink for. He told it anyway. He told it slowly, across the course of the evening and into the night, and Caleb did not interrupt, because he understood that Silas Thorne had perhaps not told this story aloud to another living soul in 10 years, and that the telling of it was costing him. Silas Thorne had been a surgeon in the Union Army. That was the simple version. The true version was longer and uglier. Silas Thorne had been a surgeon, yes, but he had also been, for 3 of the 4 years of the war, something else. He had been a man who wore a gray coat when his orders called for a gray coat, and who rode with a Confederate medical unit in Georgia, and who sent letters north by a chain of couriers whose names he had never known, and whose faces he would not have recognized in a lighted room. He had saved Confederate lives with one hand, and he had betrayed Confederate armies with the other, and when the war ended, both sides had turned their heads away from him. The Union had no use for a spy whose war was over. The Confederacy, what remained of it, had a long memory and a longer list. There were men in Georgia and in Tennessee and in South Carolina who knew Silas Thorne's face, and who knew what he had done, and who had sworn to find him. Eleanor knew, Silas said. Emma did not. Emma thought I was a doctor who was away very often. I was a doctor who was away very often. That was not a lie. It was only not the whole truth. You could not go home. I could not go home, not during the war, not for 18 months after. The last letter Eleanor sent me reached me in a hotel in Baltimore in April of '64. She wrote that Emma had a fever. She wrote that the doctor in the town was drunk more often than he was sober. She wrote that she was not afraid, that I was not to worry, that they would be well by the time I came home. He stopped. He drank from the bottle. He set the bottle down with great care. They were buried by the time I came home, he said. The neighbors had done it. There was a marker. There were 2 markers. I sat in front of the markers for 3 days. On the 4th day, I walked into the house, and I packed a bag, and I came west, and I have not practiced medicine since. Until Nora. Until Nora. They sat in the silence. The fire popped. In the bed in the corner, Nora Ashford breathed the slow breath of the deeply exhausted, and she did not stir. "Why?" Caleb said. "Did you turn the photograph over?" Silas Thorne was a long time answering. "Because I could not look at her," he said. "Because every time I looked at Emma's face, I saw all the faces I did not save. 200 men at Gettysburg, 400 at Chickamauga, and one little girl in a house in Pennsylvania whose face I did not even look at as she died because I was not in the room. And now, Silas said, I have looked, and the sky has not fallen. That is something. That is something new." He set the photograph in its place on the mantel, face up, where he would see it every time he crossed the room. 3 weeks later, Nora Ashford stood up from the bed for the first time without help, and she took 4 steps, and she fell, and she got up, and she took 3 more steps, and she fell again, and she laughed. It was a sound Silas Thorne had not heard in his cabin in 10 years. It cracked something in him. He turned away so that neither of them would see his face. "Again," he said roughly. "Do it once more. You are not finished." "I have only just started." "Then start over." She did. She began over every morning and every afternoon, and by the end of the month she could walk from the bed to the door without stopping, and by the end of the second month she could walk to the creek and back, and by the end of the third month she could carry a half-full bucket of water without spilling it, though her right leg dragged when she grew tired, and it would drag, Silas told her plainly, for the rest of her life. "I do not mind," she said. "You may mind later." "Then I will mind later. I do not mind now." In the evenings she sat at the table with the lamp, and she learned to read better than she had read before. Silas had 3 books. One was a medical text from his old practice, a battered volume that Nora found heavy-going, but that she worked at in stubborn silence. The second was a volume of Shakespeare's tragedies, bound in green leather, with the name E. Thorne in the flyleaf in a woman's hand. The third was a book of Mr. Dickens's Christmas stories. Nora read the Dickens twice. She read the Shakespeare slowly. She read the medical text with a pencil in her hand and made small marks in the margins where she did not understand. And Silas, at the end of each evening, would read the marks and write an answer beside each one. And they did not speak of this arrangement, but it continued. And she learned a great deal that winter in the light of a single lamp. Silas taught her to shoot. He did not ask if she wanted to learn. He brought out a small rifle from the locked chest under the bed, a rifle sized for a child, its stock worn smooth by small hands, and he set it in her lap one evening without ceremony. "This was Emma's," he said. "She never fired it. I mean for you to fire it." "Silas, do not make a speech of it. It is a rifle. It is better used than not used. Tomorrow morning we begin." They began the next morning. She was a bad shot. She was a worse shot the second day, and a worse shot the third. On the 4th day, she hit a tin can at 20 paces, and Silas grunted, which was his highest form of praise. And on the 14th day, she hit a tin can at 50 paces, and Silas said, "Good," and walked away before she could see his expression. Caleb watched all of this. Caleb said little. Caleb hunted and Caleb set traps, and Caleb came back each evening with meat or with nothing, and he sat at the table and ate what Silas had cooked. And he did not look at the rifle in Nora's hands except when he thought no one was looking, and then he looked at it a long time. "You do not approve," Nora said to him one evening when Silas had gone out to check the far line. "I do not know what I feel." "Say it anyway." Caleb set down his cup. He chose his words carefully. Caleb always chose his words carefully. "A rifle changes a person," he said. "That is all. The person who can shoot is not the person who cannot. I am glad you can defend yourself. I am sorry it was necessary for you to learn. My father taught me that it was necessary, not Silas. Yes, I will not be the person who cannot, not ever again. I know. And I am sorry for that too. Both can be true." She thought about that for a long time after he had gone to sleep. Both can be true. She thought it might be the truest thing anyone had said to her in her whole life. Winter broke in March, reluctantly, inch by inch. The snow receded from the south-facing slopes first, then from the roof of the cabin, then from the clearing. The creek began to speak again under its thinning ice. Nora walked further each day. One afternoon in the first week of April, she walked almost a mile down the trail toward the valley before she turned back. And when she came back to the cabin, Silas was waiting on the porch with his rifle in his hand and a look on his face that she had not seen before. "Tracks," he said. "4 riders. They came up the lower trail yesterday. They did not come all the way. They turned back when they saw the smoke from the chimney. They will come again." "Who?" "I do not know yet. Men. Men is enough." They came 3 days later, not 4 of them, only one, and she was not a man. And she rode a gray mare, and she rode it the way a person rides who has been in a saddle longer than she has been out of one. She was perhaps 45, her hair pulled back under a wide-brimmed hat, a rifle slung across her back in a way that suggested she had forgotten she was wearing it, which meant she had not forgotten it at all. She stopped the mare at the edge of the clearing, and she raised one hand, palm out, and she waited. "Silas Thorne," she called. "It is Rachel Crane. I am alone. I am coming in." Silas lowered his rifle 1 inch. Only one. "Come in, then." She came in. She swung down from the saddle with the stiffness of long riding, and she tethered the mare to the porch rail, and she climbed the steps, and she looked at Silas and at Caleb and at Nora, and her eyes settled on Nora longest. "You are the Ashford girl," Rachel Crane said. Nora went cold. "I am Nora Ashford. I do not know what you mean by the Ashford girl. I mean, there was a family by that name who came through Fort Laramie in October. A family who told a story at the trading post about a daughter they had lost in a pass. A daughter who had been pinned under a wagon and who could not be saved." Rachel Crane's face did not change. "They told the story very well. The mother wept while the father told it. The father said he had shot his own daughter to spare her a worse death. He said it was the hardest thing a man had ever been called to do. A great many people bought him drinks." Nora sat down very slowly on the edge of the porch. She felt Caleb's hand at her shoulder, steadying her. "He told them he shot me," she said. "He told them he shot you." "He did not shoot me." "No, I can see that." Rachel Crane did not make a speech of it. She did not offer sympathy. She stated it the way one states the weather, and then she moved on. And Nora understood, dimly, through the white static in her head, that this was a kindness. Pity would have broken her. Fact did not break her. Fact was something she could stand up under. "I did not come here for the Ashford girl," Rachel Crane said. "I came here because there is a child at my station who is dying, and I have no doctor within 90 miles. And I remembered that Silas Thorne once was one." Silas Thorne said nothing for a long moment. "What child?" "A girl of 10. Her wagon train was attacked 4 days ago in the lower pass. Everyone in her wagon was killed. She hid under a tarpaulin with the bodies for 2 days before my rider found her. She has a wound in her side. It is infected. I cannot stop the fever." "The wagon train," Caleb said quietly. "Whose was it?" Rachel Crane turned her eyes to him. "A party of Ashfords primarily," she said, "out of Ohio, bound for Oregon. A man named Elias Ashford was with the train. He is dead. His wife is dead. His eldest son is dead. His eldest son's wife is dead. The infant is dead. There was also a younger boy, the Shoshone, who found Lily said the younger boy had been taken north before the attack. Traded or scouting, I do not yet know which. Only the little girl survived the wagons. Her name is Lily. She is the daughter of the eldest son. She is asking for her grandfather." Nora heard the words. She understood each word as she heard it. She did not at first understand them together. She understood them one at a time, like the pages of a book being turned by a hand that was not hers. Her father was dead. Her mother was dead. Jacob was dead. Ruth was dead. The baby was dead. Lily had been hiding under a tarpaulin with her parents' bodies for 2 days. Lily was 10 years old. Lily was Jacob and Ruth's first child. Lily was her niece. "Lily," Nora said. Her voice was almost nothing. "Lily Ashford, with the dark curls. She will be 10 now. She was 9 when we left Independence." "10, yes. Her mother was Ruth Hollis before she married. Ruth was from Cincinnati. I do not know her mother's name from before, but the child's middle name is Hollis. She said that when my rider asked her." Nora pressed her hand over her mouth. She did not weep. She was not able, at that moment, to weep. The tears would come later, and they would come in a different room, and they would come for a different reason. At this moment there was only a high, silent ringing in her ears. And the fact of Lily who had walked alongside her wagon from Iowa to Wyoming, Lily who had made her a bracelet out of grass that had fallen apart by nightfall, Lily who had been handed up into the second wagon by her father and had waved a small mittened hand as the wagons pulled away. Silas, Nora said, I know. Silas, you have to go. I know. He was already moving. He was at the locked chest under the bed. He unlocked it and took out the black bag, the one Caleb had never seen before, the one with the brass clasp worn smooth from use a long time ago, and then from sitting untouched for 10 years. He set it on the table. He opened it. He checked its contents by lamplight with the old, swift, unconscious hands of a man who had once done this twice a day for 4 years. I will need a second horse, he said to Rachel. I brought a second horse. I will need hot water at the station, clean cloth, a boiling pot, not a dirty one. You will have it. I will need. He stopped. He looked at Nora. I will need Nora to stay here. Silas, listen to me, girl. If this child is who she appears to be, you will want to meet her the first time in a room that is not a sick room. That is all. Do not fight me on this. Wait for her here. I will bring her back if I can bring her back. Nora did not fight him. She nodded. She did not trust her voice. Silas crossed to the mantel, and he laid his hand for a moment on the frame of the photograph of Eleanor and Emma, and then he turned, and he walked down off the porch, and he swung up into the saddle of Rachel Crane's second horse, which Rachel Crane had brought because Rachel Crane was the kind of woman who brought a second horse. They rode out. Nora watched them disappear around the bend in the trail. Caleb stood behind her and did not speak. After a long time, Nora said very quietly, Caleb, go inside. I need a moment. Yes. He went inside. He closed the door behind him. Nora sat down on the top step of the porch, and she put her face in her hands. And only then, with her face hidden even from the empty yard, did she allow the tears to come. She did not know whom she wept for first. Later, when she tried to reconstruct the order of it, she could not. Perhaps for her mother, who had made the small high sound in the snow and had not made another. Perhaps for Jacob, who had thrown Thomas into the wagon and who had not looked back, and who had been 24 years old and had believed himself a man. Perhaps for Ruth, who had kept her face still. Perhaps for the baby who had been born in a moving wagon in September and who had been dead before its first spring. Perhaps for her father. She wept for her father. That was the part that surprised her. She wept for the man who had stood in the snow with a shovel and had done arithmetic, and who had told a story afterward at a trading post about how he had shot his daughter and who had been believed, and who had let himself be bought drinks. She wept for him because he was dead, and because nothing in his being dead undid what he had done, and because she had not, in the 4 months since he had left her in the snow, reached the bottom of the well where her answer about him was kept. And now she would never reach it because he had gone down ahead of her and had taken the answer with him. She sat on the step until her tears had gone. Then she wiped her face and she stood and she went inside, and she did not speak of it to Caleb, and Caleb did not ask. Silas Thorne rode back into the clearing 2 days later. He had the child with him, wrapped in a blanket on the front of his saddle, and the child was breathing, and the child was pale as paper, and the child had her mother's mouth. Nora knew the mouth before she knew anything else. Nora had watched that mouth form around a spoonful of broth in Ruth's kitchen in Ohio 3 years before. She is going to live, Silas said. She needs quiet. She needs to be held. Nora held her. Nora held Lily for the rest of that afternoon, and into the evening, and through the night, sitting in the chair by the fire with the small body warm against her chest and the small breath going in and out against her collarbone. At dawn, Lily woke. Lily looked up at Nora with confused eyes, and Nora said, very softly, Hello, Lily. I am your Aunt Nora. Lily considered this. She was 10 years old. She had been through very terrible things, and she was very tired. Aunt Nora is dead. No, I am not dead, Grandpapa said. I know what Grandpapa said. Grandpapa was wrong. I am here. I am real. Put your hand on my face, Lily. There. Am I cold? No. No, I am warm. I am real. I am here. Lily thought about this for a long while. Then she put her small hand up against Nora's cheek, and she kept it there. I am glad, she said. Nora could not answer. She held the child and she rocked her very slowly, and she listened to the first birds begin to call from the ridge. And she understood, as the light came up, that some things could not be forgiven and some things did not need to be. That the world sometimes gave you, in place of the thing you had lost, a different thing, a smaller thing, a thing that fit in your arms, and that this was not a replacement, and it was not a compensation, and it was not even really a mercy. It was only what happened next. And what happened next was where you lived. Rachel Crane stayed 4 days. She helped with Lily. She rode out each morning and came back each evening. And on the fourth morning, she did not ride out. And instead, she sat with Silas on the porch, and they talked in low voices. And when Nora came out to join them, Rachel Crane's face was the face of a woman who had come to say a difficult thing and was preparing herself to say it. The men who attacked the wagon train, Rachel said, they are called the Barrow brothers. There are 3 of them. They have been working the eastern passes for 2 years. I have been trying to track them for 18 months. And they have been asking questions at my station. They came through the day after Lily arrived. They did not know she was there. I hid her. But they know there was a survivor. They know one child lived. They are asking who took her and where. They are coming here, Silas said. They are coming here. Not today, perhaps not this week, but soon. The eldest Barrow is called Mason. Mason Barrow. Rachel watched Silas's face as she said this. I thought you should know the name before they arrive. Silas did not speak for a moment. How long do I have? A week, perhaps less. Then I have a week. Rachel left the next morning. She promised to send word if she learned more. She did not promise reinforcements. There were no reinforcements in that country. There was what you had and what you did with it. And Rachel Crane was honest about this, the way she was honest about everything. Silas Thorne asked Nora to come with him that evening. They walked a little way up the ridge behind the cabin, to a place where 3 pines leaned together and made a kind of wall against the wind. He sat down on a fallen log. She sat down beside him. He did not speak for some time. Mason Barrow, he said at last, you should know who he is before he arrives. It is your right to know. Tell me. He was a captain in the Georgia Infantry. I knew him. Not well enough. In '63, I passed information to a Union colonel about the supply lines of his regiment. Mason Barrow's regiment was cut off in a forest near Chattanooga for 11 days. Many of them starved. Those who did not starve ate their horses and then ate worse things. When the war ended, Mason Barrow was tried for something he did during those 11 days. He was acquitted, but the trial broke him, and the trial broke his family. And his family lost their land in the Reconstruction, and Mason Barrow spent the next 10 years drinking and hunting men. One of the men he hunted was the colonel who had the information. He found that colonel in Memphis in '73 and he killed him. The colonel, before he died, told Mason Barrow where the information had come from. You. Me. And he has been hunting you. For 2 years, perhaps longer. I did not know he had come this far west. I should have known. A man like that does not stop. Silas, he is not coming for Lily. That is the thing I want you to understand. He is coming for me. Lily is a loose end to him, a witness he did not mean to leave, and he is the kind of man who finishes what he starts. But he would not have found us here if he were only hunting her. He has found us because he has been hunting me, and because by now he has learned from some traitor that there is a woman and a girl at the Thorne cabin, and he has put the pieces together, and he is coming with a settled purpose of his own. Nora looked out across the valley. The moon had risen. The snow held the moon's light and gave it back, and the whole world was silver. Are you afraid, Silas? I am past afraid. I am somewhere the other side of it. I am sorry. I am sorry he is coming here. I am sorry he is bringing my old war into your house. This is your house. No, not anymore. It has not been only my house for some time now. You ought to know that. I ought to have said it before. She did not answer. She could not for a moment. She reached over and she took his hand, his rough old surgeon's hand, and she held it and he let her hold it, and they sat that way for a long time while the moon climbed. You are not going to die this week, Silas Thorne, she said at last. I might. You are not. I am not letting you. Nora, I am not letting you. That is all. I have used up my quota of people I let walk away from me. I have used it up entirely. Do you understand me? Silas Thorne was quiet. Then he said very softly, "Yes, daughter, I understand you." She wept then. Not much. A little. He did not look at her while she wept. He kept his eyes on the valley and the moon, and he held her hand. And when she was done, he said, "Let us go back. It is cold." They went back. They prepared the cabin over the following 3 days. Silas took the shutters from the storage shed and fitted them across the windows. Caleb rebuilt the root cellar door so it would bar from the inside, and so that a grown man could not break it down with his shoulder in less than a quarter hour. Nora cleaned every rifle in the cabin and every revolver and laid them out on the table with their ammunition in neat rows. She did this work without speaking, her hands moving quickly, her bad leg propped on a stool. She was not shaking. She had not shaken since Rachel Crane had said the name of Mason Barrow on the porch 4 mornings before. She had gone past the shaking into some country where the hands simply did what needed to be done. And she understood that this was what Silas had meant when he said he was past afraid. She did not know whether this country was a good country to live in. She suspected it was not. She was in it regardless. Rachel Crane rode back up on the morning of the 4th day. She was not alone. 2 Shoshone riders were with her, men she had worked with for 10 years, men who owed her favors and who paid their favors faithfully. They did not come into the cabin. They made their camp at the edge of the clearing and they watched the trails. "I can give you 3 rifles," Rachel said, "mine and theirs. And I can give you my eye for ground, which is the best eye in 3 counties. That is what I can give you. I cannot give you more men. I would if I could." "It is enough," Silas said. "It is not enough, but it is what we have." The Barrow brothers came in the middle of the afternoon on the 6th day. They came on horseback up the main trail because they did not yet understand they had anything to fear. There were 3 of them in dark coats, and they rode abreast. And the one in the middle, the largest, had a scar that ran from the corner of his mouth up into his hairline, and his eyes, when Silas Thorne saw them through the crack in the shuttered window, were the eyes of a man who had forgotten what it was to sleep. "Thorne!" Mason Barrow called from the edge of the clearing. "Silas Thorne! I know you are in there. Come out and let us end this." Silas did not come out. "Thorne, I have come a long way. Do me the courtesy of coming out to meet me. I have business with you that does not concern the women, and I will let the women go if we settle it between ourselves." It was a lie, and every person in the cabin knew it was a lie, because the girl in the cabin was a witness he had already ridden many miles to remove, and Mason Barrow was not a man who left witnesses a second time. "Thorne, I am waiting." Silas did not come out. Mason Barrow laughed. It was a bad laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had carried a thing for too long and who had arrived at the place where he was going to set it down, and who did not, now that he was here, know what he would do with his hands once the thing was gone. "All right, Thorne," he said. "Have it your way." He gestured to his brothers. They dismounted. They drew rifles from saddle scabbards. They spread out, one to the east side of the clearing, one to the west, and Mason Barrow walked straight down the center toward the front of the cabin, with a Colt revolver in his right hand and a second revolver on his hip. The first shot came from the ridge. It was Rachel Crane. She had climbed up the back of the ridge before dawn with one of the Shoshone men, and she had taken her position, and she had waited. And when Mason Barrow's brother on the east side of the clearing turned his head at exactly the wrong moment, Rachel Crane shot him through the throat. He fell without a sound. The second brother began to run. He ran for the cover of the woodpile. Caleb shot him from the side window of the cabin. The first bullet clipped his shoulder and spun him. The second bullet took him in the back as he tried to rise. He went down in the snow and did not move again. Mason Barrow did not run. Mason Barrow did not even turn his head when his brothers fell. Mason Barrow walked forward with the Colt in his hand and fired at the cabin door, and the door splintered, and he fired again, and the lock gave, and he kicked the door open, and he stepped inside. Silas Thorne shot him once in the shoulder as he came through the doorway. Mason Barrow did not fall. He fired back. The bullet passed through Silas's thigh and struck the stones of the fireplace, and Silas went down on one knee. Mason Barrow raised the Colt a second time. Nora shot him. She was in the corner by the bed, where Silas had placed her with Emma's rifle in her hands because Silas had said, "If he comes through the door, you will have the angle," and she had the angle now. She shot Mason Barrow through the chest. He staggered. She worked the lever and shot him again. He went down against the doorframe and slid to the floor, and he was looking at her, and his mouth was opening and closing, and he was trying to say something, and he could not. Silas Thorne crawled across the floor to him. Silas was bleeding badly. Silas put his hand over the wound in Mason Barrow's chest, and he pressed down hard, and Mason Barrow looked up at him with disbelieving eyes. "You," Mason Barrow said. "I am going to stop the bleeding, Mason. Do you hear me? I am going to stop the bleeding." "You ruined me." "I know. You ruined my family, Thorne. I had a wife. I had a son." "I know. Why are you?" "Because I am done," Silas said. "I am done with killing you men. I have been done for 10 years. I did not know it until this hour. I am stopping the bleeding, Mason. Hold on. Hold on." Mason Barrow did not hold on. He died looking up at the ceiling of a cabin in a country he had never seen before, with the hand of the man he had hated for 10 years pressed against the hole in his chest. Silas Thorne held his hand on the wound for a long moment after Mason Barrow had stopped breathing. Then he sat back, and he looked at his bloody hands, and he did not say anything for a long time. Rachel Crane came in through the broken door. She looked at the body. She looked at Silas. She looked at Nora, who had not moved from the corner, and whose rifle was still at her shoulder. "It is done," Rachel said. "Yes," Silas said. "You need a tourniquet on that leg." "Yes." She applied the tourniquet. Nora watched. Her hands were perfectly still. She set the rifle down against the wall, very carefully, as one sets down something that has served its purpose and that one does not intend to pick up again for a while. And then she walked across the room to where Lily sat in the root cellar with the trap door open above her. And she said, "It is all right, Lily. You can come up now. It is all right." Lily came up. Lily walked to Nora and put both arms around her waist and did not let go. "Was it bad?" Lily said, muffled against her. "Yes." "Is Uncle Silas all right?" "He will be." "Is Caleb all right?" "Caleb is all right." "Good," Lily said. "That is good." Thomas Ashford came to the cabin in June. He came with the same two Shoshone men who had found Lily, who had ridden with him from the north, and who stayed at the edge of the clearing with their horses and would not come closer, though Nora brought them food and thanked them in the few words of their language that Rachel Crane had taught her. Thomas was 14 years old. He was thinner than Nora remembered, and taller, and his face was older than his years in a way that she recognized, because she saw the same thing in her own face now when she caught it in the small mirror above Silas's wash basin. He came up onto the porch. He stood in front of her. He looked at her legs and at the small white scar along her jaw where the frostbite had taken a piece, and at the way she leaned a little on the porch rail without meaning to. And he opened his mouth, and he closed it, and he knelt down on the boards. "Thomas, get up. Do not. He said to tell you he was wrong. Thomas, Papa, before he died. The fever took him 2 nights before the attack. He was lucid at the end. He said to tell you, if you were ever found, if anyone ever found you, he said to tell you he was wrong. He said to tell you he was sorry. I promised him I would say it." Thomas's voice cracked. "I promised him, Nora." She knelt down beside him. Her bad leg protested. She ignored it. She took her brother's face in her hands. "Thomas," she said, "look at me. I am not angry with you. I have never been angry with you. You were 14 years old. You tried. I saw you try. Jacob threw you in the wagon. I saw it. You did not leave me. Do you understand me? You did not leave me." He was crying. She had not seen him cry since he was 7 years old. "I am here," she said. "I am alive. I am going to stay alive. And you are going to stay with me, all right? You are going to stay. You are not going anywhere ever again unless you choose to." "All right. All right. All right." She held him. She held her brother in the June sunlight on the porch of a cabin that no longer belonged only to Silas Thorne. And she looked up and saw Silas watching from the doorway, leaning on the cane he would need now for the rest of his life. And she saw Caleb in the yard with Lily on his shoulders, and she thought, "This is a strange family. This is the strangest family, and it is mine." That evening, she sat with Thomas by the fire, and she asked him about the end of the wagon train. He told her what he knew. He told her in pieces, as he was able. The train had gone on without her. They had reached the pass the next day. The weather had broken sooner than her father had calculated. They had made the descent. They had wintered at Fort Laramie, as planned. In the spring, they had set out again. In May, the infant, Jacob and Ruth's second child, had died of a sickness that took a great many infants that spring. In June, Thomas had gone out with a party of Shoshone scouts to hunt for the train, because the train was short of meat, and he had been gone 3 days. And on the second day, his father had caught the fever that was moving through that country, and by the time Thomas returned to where the train was meant to be, the train had been attacked, and everyone was dead except Lily, and Lily was not yet found. And his father's body was the first one Thomas had looked at, and his father's face had been calm as it had ever been in life. And Thomas had sat beside his father's body for an hour before the Shoshone men had come and had drawn him away. He said it to you, Nora said, at the end, before the attack, before the fever took him. He said it the morning of the day the fever took him. He knew he was going. He called me to him. He said it 3 times, Nora. He said it 3 times so I would not forget. He said to tell you he was wrong. He said to tell you he was sorry. He said, Thomas swallowed. He said he saw you in the snow every night. He said the wolves came for you in his dreams. He said he could not make them stop. Nora sat very still. He died knowing then, she said. He died knowing. Did it help him at the end? No, Thomas said. I do not think it helped him. I think it only made him tired. She nodded. She put her hand on her brother's head. The fire popped. Outside, a nightbird called once and was quiet. She did not forgive her father that night. She was not sure she ever would. But something in her that had been a closed fist for 4 months opened a small amount, and she understood that forgiveness was not perhaps the thing she had thought it was. Forgiveness was not a gift you gave. Forgiveness was not a verdict you rendered. Forgiveness was, she began to think, only the decision to set a thing down, because you could not go on carrying it. Her father had carried what he had done, and it had killed him as surely as the fever had. She would not carry it for him. That was her answer, and it was not a noble answer, and it was not a spiritual answer, and it was the only one she had. In the fall of that year, with Rachel Crane's help and with the money Silas had kept buried for 10 years in a tin under the floorboards of his cabin, they bought the long, low building at the fork of the 2 trails in the valley below the mountain. It had been a trading post, and then it had been nothing, and now it would be something else. They called it Emma's Rest. Silas wanted it called something else. Silas argued. Silas lost. Nora named it, and Nora did not lose arguments often, and Silas sat at the dedication with his cane across his knees and his eyes very bright. And he did not speak, because if he had spoken, he would have wept, and he had wept enough in the last year to last him until the end of his life. Emma's Rest took in women. That was its purpose. It took in women who had been left, and women who had been widowed, and women who had run, and women who had nowhere else, and their children. It asked no questions of them beyond whether they could lift a broom, or stir a pot, or hold a needle, and it gave them beds, and it gave them food, and it gave them, more importantly, a door that locked from the inside, and a window that looked out on a mountain, and the knowledge that the door would never be opened from the outside against their will. Rachel Crane rode the circuit between Fort Bridger and Emma's Rest all through that first year, and every time she came, she brought another woman with her, or 2 or 3. By November, there were 11 women living there and 9 children. By the following spring, there were 22 and 14. Silas took down his patient ledger in October and set it on the table one night, and he opened it, and he wrote in it again. He wrote the names of the women who came. He wrote them under a new heading he had made on a fresh page. The heading was a single word. It said, kept. Caleb left for California in the last week of October. He had received a letter. It was a thin letter in an unfamiliar hand, and it had been forwarded from San Francisco by Caleb's uncle's son, and it said in careful English that a woman named Maylin Wu was working as a cook in a hotel in Sacramento, and that she had been asking these past 2 years whether anyone had heard from a brother named Caleb. Caleb read the letter 3 times. He did not speak for an hour after reading it. Then he came and found Nora in the yard, where she was teaching Lily to ride, and he said, "I have to go." "I know. I will come back. I know." "Nora, go, Caleb. Go find her. Bring her home if she will come. Come back either way." He nodded. He did not trust his voice. He rode out the next morning with his rifle and a sack of oats, and a letter from Silas that he was not to open until he reached California. And Nora stood on the porch of Emma's Rest and watched him go. And she lifted her hand, and he lifted his. And then he was around the bend in the trail, and the bend in the trail was empty, and she stood there a while longer, looking at the empty bend. And then she turned and went back inside, because there was work to do, and there would always be work to do, and she was the woman who did it. He wrote in December. The letter was short. He had found his sister. She was well. She was coming east with him in the spring. Nora read the letter aloud at the long table in the kitchen of Emma's Rest, with Silas at her left and Lily at her right and Thomas across from her, and Rachel Crane at the head of the table, and a dozen other women and children between them. And when she finished, there was a silence. And then there was a cheer, and Silas cleared his throat and said gruffly, "Pass the bread," because he did not wish anyone to see his face. That evening, Nora walked out onto the porch of Emma's Rest alone. The sun was setting over the shoulder of the mountain where she had almost died. The light on the snow was the color of a peach, the color of something warm and living, and she stood with her hand on the railing and she looked up at the mountain. She thought of her father, not with anger now, not with forgiveness either. She had made her peace with not knowing which of those would come or whether either would. She thought of him only as a man who had stood in the snow with a shovel and who had made a choice, and who had told himself for the rest of his short life that the choice had been the only one, and who had paid for that choice by dying in a pass not very different from the one where he had meant to leave her, and who had sent, through his youngest son, the only words he had left in him to send. He had been wrong, she knew that. He had known it too at the end. It did not undo what he had done. Nothing would. But she had come to believe that there were two kinds of strength in the world, and her father had understood only one of them. Her father had understood the strength that chose, in hard moments, whom to abandon. It was a real strength. She would not pretend it was not. It had built the country she stood in. It had crossed the mountains and plowed the plains. And there were men buried under every mile of that progress, and women and girls, and her father had been a man of that country. But there was another strength. She had learned it in a small cabin high on a mountain from a ruined surgeon who had kept the names of everyone he had lost in a book no one else had ever seen, and from a quiet man who had seen his sister in a stranger's face and had not looked away this time, and from a gray-haired woman who rode alone through a hard country and brought back women and children and would not say why, and from a 10-year-old girl who had come up out of a root cellar and had chosen, because she was 10 years old and because children were braver than adults, to love the world anyway. The second strength was the strength that refused to abandon anyone. The strength that said, "We all matter or none of us do." The strength that dug its heels in and built a house where there had been only snow. Her father had lived by the first strength, and it had killed him. She was going to live by the second, and when she died, whenever that was, whatever mountain took her in the end, she was going to die in a house full of women who had not been left behind. That was going to be her answer to him and to the country that had made him and to every man who had ever stood in the snow with a shovel and told himself that he had no choice. She had been left to die in the snow. She had chosen to live anyway. And in choosing to live, she had built a place where no one would ever be left again. She stood on the porch until the sun went all the way down. Then she turned and she went back inside where the lamps had been lit and where Silas was reading to Lily by the fire, and where Thomas was bent over a book of his own at the kitchen table, and where somewhere on a California road Caleb Wu was riding east with his sister behind him, and where Rachel Crane was stabling a tired horse in the yard, and where the long table was being set for supper, and where every woman in the house was coming in from the day's work. She crossed the threshold. She pulled the door closed behind her against the cold. Inside it was warm. Inside it was warm. And it was hers and it was theirs, and the lamps were lit, and supper was waiting, and no one was missing.